The Scottish Patriot, William Wallace. He united a fractured realm, then was torn apart for it.
On August 23, 1305, a tall, battered prisoner was dragged naked by the heels of a horse through the cobblestone streets of London. His destination was Smithfield, where an agonizing, highly public execution awaited him. The man had been denied the right to speak in his own defense during a mock trial at Westminster Hall, condemned as a traitor to a king he had never served. Yet, as the crowds jeered and the executioner prepared the ropes, the prisoner's gaze remained unbroken. He was not a king, nor was he a man of immense noble wealth.
He was a minor landowner who had managed to achieve the impossible. He had brought the mighty English war machine to a grinding halt, united a fractured nation, and cemented his name into the bedrock of history. This man, walking into the shadow of a brutal death, was William Wallace.
Sir William Wallace was born around the year 1270 in Scotland. He was a Scottish knight, military strategist, and the foremost leader during the early years of the First War of Scottish Independence. Operating primarily in the military and political spheres of the late 13th and early 14th centuries, his primary goal was to free Scotland from the oppressive occupation of King Edward I of England. Wallace is considered highly influential, not because he won the war — he was executed long before Scottish independence was secured — but because he transformed a localized aristocratic rebellion into a fierce, populous resistance. He gave the Scottish people an enduring symbol of unyielding national identity.
The precise details of Wallace's early life are famously obscured by time and myth. Born around 1270, his birthplace is widely debated among modern historians. Traditional accounts suggest he was born in Elderslie, Renfrewshire, while more recent historical interpretations point to Ellerslie in Ayrshire. Even his father's identity has been a subject of scholarly dispute. For centuries, he was believed to be the son of Sir Malcolm Wallace, but a rediscovery of Wallace's own seal on a letter dated 1297 clearly identifies him as William, son of Alan Wallace.
Regardless of his exact birthplace, Wallace was born into a minor noble family. He grew up during the Golden Age of King Alexander III, a period of relative peace and economic stability for Scotland. However, this stability shattered in 1286, when the 44-year-old King Alexander fell from his horse in the dark and died. The tragic death of the king's young heir, the Maid of Norway, in 1290, plunged Scotland into a massive succession crisis known as the Great Cause. With 13 competitors vying for the Scottish throne, the nation's political environment became deeply fractured, leaving the country vulnerable to outside interference. Little is known of Wallace's formal education, but his later diplomatic letters written in fluent Latin suggest he received training from the clergy, possibly from two uncles who were priests. The event that abruptly changed Wallace's life was the English invasion of Scotland. In 1292, King Edward I of England, acting as arbitrator, awarded the Scottish crown to John Balliol. However, Edward treated Balliol as a vassal, demanding Scottish troops and taxes. When the Scottish nobility eventually rebelled, Edward, known as the Hammer of the Scots, invaded in 1296. The English army sacked the town of Berwick, slaughtering thousands of civilians, and easily defeated the Scottish forces at the Battle of Dunbar. Edward I stripped Scotland of its sovereignty, forced King John to abdicate, and notoriously stole the Stone of Destiny, the ancient coronation seat of Scottish kings. The English placed heavy military garrisons across Scotland, imposing harsh taxes and brutal martial law. For a young, educated, and physically capable man like Wallace, witnessing his homeland reduced to a conquered province was an intolerable humiliation. The daily abuses suffered by the Scottish peasantry under English sheriffs forged his deep-seated hatred of the occupation and shaped his uncompromising commitment to liberation.
Wallace transitioned from an obscure landowner to a wanted outlaw in May 1297. According to historical records, Wallace led a small band of men in a sudden, violent raid on the town of Lanark. There, he assassinated William de Heselrigge, the English High Sheriff of Lanark. While later romantic myths, popularized by the 15th century poet Blind Harry, suggest Wallace killed the sheriff to avenge the murder of his secret wife, Marian Radefoot, there is no contemporary historical evidence to verify her existence.
Regardless of his personal motives, the assassination was a spark in a powder keg. Word of his successful strike spread rapidly. Unlike the high-born Scottish nobles who often surrendered to protect their vast estates, Wallace was a man of the people. Disenfranchised peasants, local landowners, and angry youths flocked to his banner. By the summer of 1297, Wallace was leading a highly effective guerrilla war, ambushing English patrols and capturing isolated garrisons in the forests of central Scotland. Wallace's ultimate breakthrough occurred on September 11, 1297, at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. The English sent a massive army, estimated at 10,000 to 12,000 infantry and heavy cavalry, to crush the Scottish rebellion. Wallace, who had joined forces with another young rebel leader named Andrew Murray, commanded a much smaller force of roughly 6,000 poorly equipped spearmen.
Instead of fighting on open ground, Wallace and Moray positioned their men on the high ground overlooking a narrow wooden bridge spanning the River Forth. They waited patiently as the heavy English cavalry began crossing the bridge, a process that could only happen 2 horses abreast. Once roughly a third of the English force had crossed, Wallace ordered the attack. The Scots charged, trapping the English against the river. The heavy cavalry was decimated in the muddy banks, and thousands of English soldiers were slaughtered or drowned. It was an earth-shattering victory. A peasant army had defeated the finest knights in Europe.
In the aftermath, Wallace was knighted and appointed as Guardian of Scotland, officially elevating him from an outlaw to the ruler of the realm in the name of the exiled King John.
Following Stirling Bridge, Wallace moved rapidly to capitalize on his success. In October 1297, he sent the famous Lübeck letter to the merchants of Lübeck and Hamburg in Germany. This diplomatic document declared that Scotland was free of English rule and open for international trade. In November 1297, to secure supplies and strike terror into the enemy, Wallace led his army across the border, ravaging the northern English counties of Northumberland and Cumberland. On July 22, 1298, Wallace faced his greatest test at the Battle of Falkirk. King Edward I personally marched north with an overwhelming force of around 15,000 men, including thousands of lethal Welsh longbowmen.
Wallace arranged his roughly 6,000 men into schiltrons, massive defensive circles of bristling spears. While the schiltrons withheld the English cavalry, Edward ordered his archers to unleash storms of arrows. The Scottish formations were decimated, and Wallace barely escaped the slaughter with his life. In late 1298, taking responsibility for the catastrophic defeat at Falkirk, Wallace resigned his title as Guardian of Scotland. Between 1299 and 1302, Wallace travelled abroad. Historical records show he visited the court of King Philip IV of France, seeking military and financial aid, and some historians suggest he may have even travelled to Rome to plead Scotland's case before the Pope.
William Wallace is best known for being the unyielding face of Scottish defiance. While many prominent Scottish nobles, including Robert the Bruce, repeatedly switched sides to preserve their wealth, Wallace never once swore an oath of fealty to Edward I. His fame grew from his sheer refusal to submit. He became a boogeyman to the English establishment and an almost mythical hero to the Scottish commoners. The media of the era, travelling bards, church chronicles, and word of mouth, amplified his reputation as a giant of a man who could not be bought or broken. His name became historically paramount because he proved that English military supremacy was not absolute, laying the ideological groundwork for a war of independence that would outlast him. Wallace was driven by an absolute, unshakable belief in Scottish sovereignty. As a human being, he was characterized by immense charisma, intense religious devotion, and absolute ruthlessness. Contemporary English chroniclers described him as a bloodthirsty bandit, while Scottish accounts praised his piety. It is recorded that he carried a psalter, a book of psalms, with him at all times, relying heavily on the spiritual guidance of the Catholic Church.
Physically, he was reputed to be incredibly tall and strong. While exact measurements are lost to time, the 5'4" Wallace sword displayed in the National Wallace Monument suggests a man of immense physical stature, though the sword's authenticity as his exact weapon remains heavily debated. His leadership style was leading by example. He fought in the mud alongside his men. However, his uncompromising nature was also a weakness. He lacked the political subtlety required to navigate the treacherous, self-serving world of the high Scottish nobility, which ultimately left him isolated.
Wallace's life was marred by severe failures and betrayals. His greatest military failure was the Battle of Falkirk in 1298. Critics and historians note that Wallace severely underestimated the tactical genius of Edward I and the devastating power of the English longbow. At Falkirk, Wallace's inability to protect his infantry or utilize his own cavalry effectively resulted in the slaughter of thousands of his followers. Furthermore, Wallace faced constant friction with the Scottish elite. The High Lords viewed him as a social inferior, a mere knight commanding forces that legally belonged to them. After his return from France around 1303, Wallace found a Scotland where most nobles had already submitted to English rule. He was forced back into the shadows, fighting a desperate, fading guerrilla war. His ultimate downfall was a product of Scottish betrayal. On August 5, 1305, he was betrayed by a fellow Scotsman, Sir John de Menteith, who handed him over to English soldiers at Rob Royston, near Glasgow.
In the short term, Wallace's brutal execution was intended by Edward I to crush the Scottish spirit. His body was hanged, drawn, and quartered. His head was dipped in tar and placed on a spike atop London Bridge, while his severed limbs were displayed in Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth as a gruesome warning. However, the effect was the exact opposite. Wallace's martyrdom horrified the Scottish populace and galvanized the resistance. Just 6 months after Wallace's death, Rolett the Bruce seized the Scottish throne and reignited the war, eventually securing Scottish independence at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314.
In the long term, Wallace's impact was largely cultural and political. He became the eternal symbol of the Scottish nation. Beyond Scotland, Wallace's story has been cited globally in discussions regarding human rights, sovereignty, and the moral right to resist tyranny. He proved that national identity resides in the will of the common people, not just in the bloodlines of kings.
Today, William Wallace is remembered as one of Scotland's greatest national heroes. His historical reality, however, is heavily entangled with romantic mythology. In the late 15th century, the poet Blind Harry wrote The Wallace, an epic, highly exaggerated poem consisting of 11,853 lines. This book shaped Wallace's legacy for centuries, portraying him as a superhuman warrior. In 1869, the National Wallace Monument, a towering 220-foot sandstone structure accessed by 246 steps, was completed outside Stirling, standing as a permanent architectural tribute to his victory. In modern media, his legacy was radically amplified by the 1995 Hollywood film Braveheart. Although heavily criticized by historians for glaring inaccuracies, such as altering the timeline, changing Wallace's social class, and inventing a romance with the French princess Isabella, the film won 5 Academy Awards and triggered a massive resurgence in modern Scottish political nationalism. Today, his name remains a potent rallying cry in debates over Scottish independence and British devolution. The life of William Wallace reveals the terrifying, transcendent power of absolute conviction. In a medieval world where land, wealth, and titles dictated morality, Wallace dared to value sovereignty above his own survival. He was not a perfect man. He was violent, uncompromising, and ultimately outmaneuvered by the brutal politics of his age.
Yet his failure to survive did not equate to a failure of his cause. By refusing to bow, Wallace sacrificed his physical life, but achieved historical immortality. His story endures as a profound reminder that true influence is not always measured by the battles won in a single lifetime, but by the fire of resistance left burning for generations to follow.